Welcome, everyone. Happy September. I hope everyone had a great Labor Day weekend, and welcome to our September briefing. My name's Erica Edelson. I'm a co-founder of Ruby. And I'm going to introduce our speaker for today. We have George Goehl. George was the director of People's Action for 15 years. He's really well known in the world of grassroots organizing, particularly in rural areas. And I have been following George for years. He didn't know that, but I've been stalking him for years, reading his blog and listening to his podcast. And he is someone who has such good instincts and so much experience. So I'm absolutely thrilled to have him here with us today. He's going to talk about how he came to form this new initiative that he has where he's training people to organize working class campaigns. And we'll learn a little bit about his journey and what's on offer now, which I think is incredibly relevant to all the work that we're trying to do here with Ruby. So really delighted. Thank you so much for being here, George, and you can take it away.
Hey, thank you so much. I appreciate it. I'm glad to be here. Big Ruby fan, and have been for a while. So just really quick, like I am an organizer kind of first and foremost. And I grew up in rural Southern Indiana, and then kind of in my late teens, actually was in a good bit of trouble and hungry, and ended up at a local soup kitchen to eat. And luckily there was a man there named Vanescu Janahan, an Armenian man from Beirut, who decided to invest in me and kind of get me off the street. He gave me half his wage. He made about $4 an hour, and he gave me half of it to come in and wash dishes and chop up vegetables and whatnot, just to kind of keep me close. And long story, but I eventually got a true paying gig with an actual paycheck, washing dishes at the soup kitchen. Took years, but got my act together and got really involved in this community kitchen in Indiana. But about 3 years into that, I looked up and it really hit me. I was like, almost everybody that was eating in the dining hall that day was in line with me 3 years before, and lots of new people. So yes, nobody had starved on our watch, but the reason that people needed a soup kitchen in the first place, that still remained. And, I grew up in a community where I didn't really get a lot of political education about how change happened and about power, but luckily around then I found a book about organizing and about the idea of bringing people together and building power. And we started organizing out of the soup kitchen. And really relevant to today's conversation, there was a key moment in my life where we started organizing in Southern Indiana. We were organizing in public housing, in the soup kitchen, in homeless shelters around housing issues. We were getting a lot of people together, and we were making a lot of noise, and we were getting in the media, but we were not winning. We were not changing anything. And then a guy from Indianapolis invited me to a meeting about tenant organizing. And in this meeting, he was talking, and I'd be honest at that, I was, at that point in my life, a little skeptical of his three-piece suit, but he seemed to know how to do this thing that we were struggling to figure out how to do in Southern Indiana. Invited him down to a house. We got 30 people together. We didn't have any money to pay him. We could pay for his gas and feed him. And he broke down, like, here are the fundamentals of how you get people together, you hold them together, you get in a fight and you win things and you change people's lives. And then you go on to greater and bigger fights and challenges. And from that moment forward, I've been incapable of being cynical, because I actually know if we do these things, these core skills and fundamentals, and if more people knew how to do them, we'd be able to change so much more than we're able to do. So, and as Erica said, for a long time, I ran this organization called People's Action that did community organizing all across the country. I left 18 months ago. One, because 15 years is probably long enough, if not too long, to stay in any one place. But secondly, I just had this sense that a lot of what was happening in the community organizing world and in the progressive world was really not designed. And a lot of people weren't even interested in reaching the people that I grew up with, who were rural, small town, who might kind of be a little liberal leaning on one issue and conservative on other issues, certainly wouldn't understand a lot of the language that's being used today, and it wouldn't make sense to folks. And me and a few folks felt like we needed to build organizing and engagement and electoral work that was actually made sense to way more people in this country, including people that were not already super progressive. So we created this organization, and we're really doing three things. We are, one, seeding new projects to reach everyday people that we think won't be reached by today's kind of organizing and liberal and progressive sector. And just a couple examples, like in the Midwest, organizing older seniors for who long-term care is the priority issue. And that came out of listening. We went out and did a lot of one-on-ones and knocked on doors and had conversations. And so very big live fights around both kind of in-home long-term care, but also the kind of rash of nursing home closures, organizing working class moms that are liberal, moderate, and conservative about the need for a big public intervention in childcare, and then have built a model in the Southwest that's engaging Chicanos who are kind of not engaged in either kind of electoral politics or community organizations at this point. The second piece is training, which we're going to talk about more. And then the third piece of what we do, which Eric kind of referenced, is telling the story of why writing off huge swaths of the country and the people that live there is both morally a mistake, and it's also strategically a mistake, and why actually, if we're present with people, we invest in communities that are often overlooked by folks on the coasts, good things can happen. And so that includes the podcast that Erica mentioned, To See Each Other, which follows the story of rural organizing in 6 communities in the kind of after Trump got elected, and a book that's in process called To See Each Other, which is really about why we need to start where people are at, suspend judgment, be present with people, and bring more people along for the ride. But for our conversation today, one of the big things we're focused on is how do we train thousands of people in these fundamentals of organizing that I mentioned earlier, that just are tried and true at getting people involved, getting people in motion, getting people to get into fights and actually winning stuff. And in that process, we move people from being pretty cynical. You'll hear people chant, "I believe that we will win." I don't think most people believe that right now. But if you give people the experience of winning and coming together and having some success, that you actually build a collective self-confidence. And so we're trying to train thousands of people how to do that. And I would just say a couple things about the things we're training in. These are basic organizing skills that include starting where people are at instead of coming in and with our idea of where people should be. This includes looking for widely and deeply felt issues, the issues that are going to inspire and generate the most energy and activity in the community, not the issues picked by a party or by philanthropy. How do you take an issue from being some big unwieldy problem like poverty, pollution, climate change, to something tangible you can organize around? How to do our power analysis to really understand what would motivate and move the person you're trying to move, to how do we develop strategy and look for strategic leverage where we actually, when we're trying to move things that really you should not be able to move, we might be able to find leverage to be able to move things. So those are some of the core things that we're training people on. The other point is we're just training in common sense language, which we think has gotten lost a lot today, and just bringing it back to common sense language. We've trained lots of people through this working class campaigns training that I'm going to talk to you guys about. One of the number one pieces of feedback people have said is they're like, this is the first training I've been in where I could actually just take it word for word out to the family farm or to the church basement or to the neighborhood, and I wouldn't have to change a single word. It's just the way people talk, which I'm actually sad that that's a big development, but it seems to be really landing with people. So I'm just going to walk you through a little bit of some of the concepts that we're training on, and then I want to open it up for conversations. These are going to be little kind of teasers around these. So let's see if I'm capable of doing a screen share here. And it's going to take me a second. And I'm going to do what I got to do here. View slideshow. That look good? Eric, can I get a thumbs up? We looking good? Yep. Okay.
Yep,
great.
that's good.
So kind of here, this is one of the trainings we're doing. We're doing a number of them, but this is one. This is a week-long training that we are doing that is 5 days a week, 90 minutes a day. We've been doing it on Zoom. We could do it, in a community, and we plan on kind of taking it on the road next year. But let me get this stuff out of my way. So one, we think of finding and developing people that we would get involved in helping them become leaders in the community is we do that throughout all of our work. But the first thing we look for is widely and deeply felt issues. These are issues that are felt by a lot of people in the community, and a lot of people care about them, and they're also deeply felt. People feel passionate about them, and we feel like if it's not widely felt and deeply felt, we're probably working on the wrong issue. The second is cutting an issue. Like this is the thing I ran into in Southern Indiana. We were getting lots of people involved. Lots of people cared about this issue of affordable housing, but we were talking about some broad, big thing about the need for affordable housing. And what we get taught in organizing is how do we cut that issue, something as big as an affordable housing crisis that includes, wages, it includes gentrification, public housing budget, zoning laws, all these things, way too much for a lot of organizers to take on, especially early on. How do we cut that issue, like literally carve out a more manageable part of it, organize around that and win, and then build people's confidence in coming together and organizing. And once you do this, nobody will ever say people don't want to get involved, we can't win, because they experienced winning. Then third, we actually have to run a power and self-interest analysis. We have to understand who has power over what we want, what all the things are that they have power over, what power they might have over us, but also what's their self-interest. What are the things that are going to be most likely to move somebody? In often cases, let's say I did a lot of organizing around the big banks after the financial crisis. These were not people that wanted to come to the table and negotiate with communities who they had ripped off. So we had to figure out what would make it in their self-interest to come to the table. And then finally, strategic campaigns. And the key part of this, where might we find leverage in a campaign that we wouldn't have otherwise and make something more likely to win? So let's see how I do this slideshow here. Okay, I see. So yeah, here's just an example of the widely and deeply felt. We're always looking up in this sweet spot where something is widely and deeply felt. If you find an issue that not that many people care about, you're definitely going to have a hell of a time organizing. And if it's a fight that nobody's going to get off the couch to fight for, you're going to have a hard time winning. And this is a one day of the training we do, is really how do you cut an issue? And so there are kind of 5 key components we look out for cutting an issue. And when this is the point I was talking about, of going from something unwieldy like climate change to something we could organize around and win on, we carve out a very discrete part of the problem and name a solution. Early on, if we were going to organize, let's say in one of the counties, Jackson County, one of the counties I grew up in Indiana, and we were just starting a new group, we're not going to come with, let's organize around climate change. We're going to be we're going to organize around climate change, something we might be able to make an impact in Jackson County or one of the towns in Jackson County. So we're going to cut out something discrete. We're going to figure out who has power to deliver over that thing. Third, we're going to frame it as a solution. We don't organize around problems. Organizing around problems is it's actually dispiriting. It doesn't bring people around. People we've been talking about that problem forever. We organize around solutions. We frame it as a demand. Sometimes in some of the communities, we don't go banding the word demand around all the time. That could backfire, probably in a lot of communities you all live in, because we all kind of live in neighborhood with other people, even if we don't agree on things. But then the idea that we are demanding something, that we are asking for something that we deserve versus something we are begging for, is something that's really important for the people we organize to feel in their bones. And then finally, we frame an issue in a way that strengthens our hand. Let's see. Yeah. So we often do a power analysis and self-interest analysis of the people we're trying to move. And that could be a bank CEO, that could be a big polluter, that could be a political leader. And we want to figure out what is it that's going to move them. And so we would say organizing to win is really hard. With a good power analysis, it's impossible without one. So we teach people how to put time there. I'm actually going to go to a slide here. I ran a campaign once when Andrew Cuomo, when he was the head of HUD, was refusing to meet with communities who had been ripped off by fraud in the Federal Housing Administration loan program. And we had asked him for meetings. We had asked regional directors of HUD for meetings. We had sent letters. We had gotten lots of media. He refused, and we had gone to his house and protested, and he would refuse to meet. At that time, we didn't know Cuomo well enough to know he was a pretty obstinate person and was just likely not to meet. But he was definitely more likely to meet with the mortgage companies that are ripping people off in the communities. And so we had to pause in a campaign that had been going for 2 years and come up with the answers to these things. What is it that he has power over? What are all of the things that he might have power over? Who has power over him? So who might have the likelihood to move him? What is it that he most wants in the world, and what does he not want? And then from there, you might be able to refine your strategy. I'd love to come back and talk about this one if it's something people are interested in. But we went on to win this campaign, to win a program that cut hundreds of fraudulent mortgage companies out of this program, the exact companies that were ripping working class communities off. We won appraisal reform, and we got lots of stuff done with the abandoned HUD properties in the community, but only because we backed up and ran this kind of power analysis. Let me maybe do 2 more slides here. So one of the other things we train on is leverage. Like, we are trying to win things that we should not be able to win because there are people with a vested interest in the way things are. So we are trying to find some kind of leverage. I think most people on this phone know what it's like to try to move something you shouldn't be able to move. My dad died a couple years ago. He always seemed to send me tools, but he sent me pry bars more than once. So I figured these must have been pretty important in his life, and recently had to move a bunch of big creek stone out of the backyard into a different place. And I was glad I had those pry bars. There's no way I could have moved them by myself. And organizing, we're constantly looking for where we might have leverage. We might find it in our power analysis and the self-interest part of that power analysis, but we also might find it in timing. Maybe something's changed in the world. There's been a big event in the world. There's been, let's say one of you guys has an organization and you get 1,000 people together once a year. You're going to have more leverage in that moment. So we look for timing. Rules. There might be rules. A lot of the rules benefit the status quo, the way things are, but sometimes there are rules that benefit us. One that I certainly organized around was the Community Reinvestment Act, that basically gave communities leverage when banks wanted to merge or acquire another bank. They actually had to apply for that merger or acquisition, and there was a moment that communities could kind of at least slow it down. And in that, we had some leverage and were able to do it. And then finally, a change in conditions. One classic change in conditions could just be that the right person got elected and the electoral conditions are better for us to organize in. I think, Eric, I'm thinking of stopping there and open it up for questions, but I'm happy to dig into more of these training ideas.
Sure, we can open for questions, and then, feel free, since we've still got quite a bit of time, to give an elaborate answer to some of these things, and maybe even dip back into some of your slides. That would be totally fine. Yeah, that was great. Thank you so much. I love the homemade look to your slides. Those are really nice. Okay, so folks, go ahead and either ask your question in the chat or raise your little zoomy hand, and I'm gonna look for you here. Okay, Karen and Bruce. It looks like we have Bruce Menke.
Jack, really, really impressive sounding program. I have to ask you, when is your book coming out?
Oh, yeah. Great. Thank you. I appreciate that. I actually have a small book called The Fundamentals of Community Organizing, which are basically a bit of a love letter to the 30 ideas that I think are key to organizing communities, coming out in January. And then the bigger book, which is really a little more about rural, kind of engagement and organizing story, is like, that's in progress, and like working on that. And I'll just say this, on some days having a blast writing that book, and on other days it's like the worst thing in the world. So definitely a love-hate thing with writing this book, but I was really into it last week, so that's good. I'm gonna keep remembering that. So thanks, but it might be a minute.
George, we had someone request to pull up that the 4-quadrant grid again. I'm guessing that was the Cuomo one. Margaret, is that right?
Let me see if I can do
it. And maybe, I think it would be really helpful. Like,
no, there it was. It's a blue background. No.
Oh, I see.
It's.
Is that it?
Was that the one, Margaret?
Yes, that's it. That's
okay. We can just leave it up there for a second, or did you want some more explanation of what that's
No,
representing?
I've used grids before, but not in this context, and I'd like to hear more about that. You know, how you create that, how you
Yeah.
fit people into that framework.
Yeah. I think one of the best kind of ways we can do engagement in organizing in any community is to listen. And I think it's obvious. I feel like it's come out of style to listen, but one of the ways that seems to work over and over, whether it's a rural community or an urban neighborhood, is to go out and ask lots of people, like, what issues do they most care about? What do they most want changed in the community or the town or the city? I have an organizer that works with me, just did 30 meetings like that in rural communities. And this is the one I was referencing earlier. And 9 out of 10 said basically issues related to long-term care nursing homes. So like at that, and people were upset about it and had passion. So I would say like that, to us, we were like, okay, this is clearly widely felt, because 90% of people named it as their top issue, which is actually not normal. I've never had that happen before. I'd be happy with 60 people naming something as their top issue. And people were passionate about it. There might be other issues would run in. Lots of people care about it, but they don't feel that passion. And that passion is going to be essential if we're going to drive. So I think the kind of key things is I just recommend and making the case for more listening for issues versus selling issues. So we teach that we listen for issues basically through asking. We think we found something that is widely and deeply felt, and then we test it with even more people to confirm it. And then we try to organize the broader community around the issue cut that I talked about. So, but it starts with listening. You can do it differently. I know somebody else that just wrote a rant on Reddit, and it went crazy. And it's like, well, they clearly found a widely and deeply felt issue. But I think if you're wondering why something's maybe not moving and people aren't passionate, it might be because it's not both widely and deeply felt.
Mary is asking in the chat about on this topic of cutting the issue, how do you get from the global to the specific issue?
That's a great question. Let's just pull up that slide since we're talking about it. Not that this tells us how to do it. Let's think of a good example. I'll go back to the first time I learned it. So I think I said in Southern Indiana, we were organizing in these different places and getting lots of people together around the issue of affordable housing. I mean, we had like 200 people come to the county courthouse in what then was probably a 60,000 person city. And that's a lot. We had 40 people show up unannounced at a city council meeting. That wasn't normal. But we were just demanding more, that we need to do something about affordable housing. We were raising awareness that affordable housing was a problem. So we then started kind of doing some research, called some other communities that we'd heard had dealt with this, tried to find a kind of a solution. And then we found some communities about our size that had won a thing called a housing trust fund that I'm sure some people on this call have heard about, but it was basically a fund that the city and county in this case put some money into off of real estate transfers that were like over, let's say at that point, it was like $250,000. So it would have probably been about a $400,000 house now. So, in some communities, a pretty nice house, there was like a $10, $15 fee on top of that. That went into a fund to support the development of affordable housing. So it was specific. We had a specific way to fund it. It had a name. The mayor and the city council had to approve it. There was a very clear policy. So I don't think there's one way, but I think you have to kind of research and kick around what is something around this that we might actually be able to organize around and win. And happy to say I could send out more details around how that's processed. But I do, when I drive around the country and meet with people, and I find this thing of cutting the issue to be where most people get stuck because they don't have something clear enough to organize around. And if that wasn't a satisfactory answer, I'd want to keep going.
We'll leave it at that. Or if it wasn't a satisfactory answer, you can sign up for the next 5-week training. Yeah, right. Lisa was wanting to know in what ways is the rural organizing unique compared to organizing in urban or suburban areas?
Yeah, I feel like I'm gonna say something here probably everybody knows is, I mean, it's definitely more work kind of door to door, so to speak. Like, when I moved to Chicago to organize, I could knock 40 doors and have 10, 15 conversations, in a couple of hours. Right. I didn't have to get, once I parked, I wouldn't have to get out of a car. So just the amount of time that has to go into moving from house to house, I would say that's a key one. I think, like, just comparing Chicago to Southern Indiana, where I grew up, like, people in Chicago, when I got to Chicago, were like talked about power a lot more. There was a little more of a confrontational nature. Using words like demand was okay. You weren't going to run into the mayor at the grocery store or something like that, and you might in a rural community or small town. So I would say, I think that whole notion that you live in this smaller community you still need to live in, it sometimes makes it harder to raise tension. Yeah, and I mean, I would say those were the big ones. I would say those are the biggest ones I've run into. So distance, time. I mean, I think, like, whenever I go back home to Indiana, like, I assume there's a lot of rural folks on the call. Like, it's always heartwarming how much time people are willing to spend. So it's not this sense that you find in urban communities, everybody's basically trying to get moving to the next thing, and people are happy to sit and lean over the truck or the fence and talk for, a long time, even if that wasn't planned. I've been working on my dad's house in Indiana, and pretty common for a neighbor to see me, trying to, cut up a dead tree or something, and come, wasn't their plan for the day, and come over and help for hours. And so there's a little more time. You don't have to rush as much in some of those conversations and one-on-ones. So, but I don't think I'm saying much here that people don't know.
No, that's good. Thank you. Barbara Harrison, you've had your hand up for a while. Go ahead. Let's see. Barbara, are you still there? Oh, she might have stepped away for a second. So Ben, I'll go to you. Ben Fink. Hi, Ben.
Hello. Yeah, George, we met in DC a few years ago. I used to work at Apple Chef in Appalachia, and I really appreciate your being here and kind of the way you're framing this. And I want to share a story that leads to a question, which is, when I moved to East Kentucky, in the coal fields where I lived for years as a self-described communist Jew from the Northeast, I knew a certain number of people would brush me offhand for being an outsider. I did not know it would be the leftists and the liberals. And I'm thinking about what you're talking about, and you're talking about the challenges of getting outside of that kind of discourse. And I found that it's a lot easier to get to meet the people that are outside of it than those that are inside of it. So I'm curious if there is any strategy in what you're doing about, frankly, how to convince the people in that world to join with this stuff. And if so, how? Or is the strategy like, they're going to do their own thing and we're just going to work with everybody else?
And when you say they, do you mean the kind of progressive left or whatever? Is that what
the people who will not work with rural people because they don't adhere to, the issue list and the ways of the kind of quote unquote right way of speaking and thinking?
Yeah, that's a good question. I've wrestled with this a lot. Like, I think we actually have to challenge this notion of writing people off, or that there's only one way to speak, or if you don't agree with all of these things, you are suddenly on the outs and on the outside. I think that's a thing we actually have to address. And I think that's why some of the storytelling, and I think, this might line up with what you were saying, I think spending all of our time in that fight versus just being with people in community who are hurting and need some justice and need some power. We could spend all our time in one thing. So the team that I'm part of, we're trying to spend most of our time, in communities, on the road, training people, engaging people in communities that have been written off, and starting there, and also remembering how we used to talk. I know I used to have to raise a lot of money running a national community organization, and I literally forgot how I used to talk. Like, I would say, I mean, ridiculous language I came up with in trying to raise money that after I left and I would hear something come out of my mouth, I'd want to pull it back in before it went out into the world. So I guess I think I'm saying I think we need to do both, and I definitely agree with you. It's a major issue.
Thanks.
I have a question from David in the chat, and David, I might ask you to come off mute because I'm not sure I understand, but it says in terms of the power analysis, can you help with types who are obvious versus hidden? David, do you mean like how do you identify who are the hidden power brokers when you're doing a power mapping analysis?
Well, yes, in a way. I'm in a rural area, very rural area, and the obvious power brokers in the community are the people that are on the commission and run businesses and things like that. But there are a lot of other people that once you get into an issue, you find out there are people that are kind of hidden in the community that can help, but you're way down the line sometimes when you get to the point of finding those people. So doing the analysis didn't help a lot because you missed a lot of the people that can actually help. And I was wondering, have you run into that? And I'm sure you have.
Yeah.
And you mentioned fight a lot of times, and so sometimes you end up gaining warriors down the line that help in the fight or can hurt you too.
Yeah.
And just wondered if you could expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, I totally know what you're talking about. And it's like, it's also kind of, it's frustrating when that happens because you end up seeing the strategy you had wasn't quite correct because you didn't have all of the information. And then I think there's one of the things we always struggle with is you need to do more research. You need to really kind of constantly have your ear to the ground and understand what's happening and who the players are. And you don't want to get into kind of analysis, like a circle where you actually never move to action, because sometimes I'm sure we've all been in groups where there are people that will do everything they can to move the group, keep the group from moving to action or to do anything that might be, slightly kind of confrontational. So I think we have to find that. But I guess I don't have any great secret except like teach your teams to constantly be looking and thinking through a kind of power analysis and mapping frame, and then sharing intelligence at every meeting and seeing what you might come up with. I mean, it's and I think this is like, I've found the best organizers I know to be like uniquely curious people. Like, and first, like curious about humans and the human condition and what moves people and inspires people and gets people stuck. Like they just kind of naturally really like curious. But that curiosity also extends to like power and the systems that we live in and society and culture. And so I think, and those people I see like constantly learn more about like who are the players in the community, what's going on, and the minute they think they figured it out, they're ready to question it too. And I think that's the key, is like to never think you figured it out, to never think you have all the pieces. Whereas there's some angle, which is what I hear you saying, that I'm like missing here. So I don't have some secret, I don't have a spreadsheet or one of these cool graphics to show on this one, but I'm really glad you brought it up, and I'm definitely going to think about it more since you said it.
Melody Reeves, go ahead.
Hi, I'm a huge fan of a lot of what you're talking about and about basic organizing skills and training and language, common sense language. I have seen a lot of really great winning campaigns in rural areas over many decades that haven't translated to long-term support for, say, democratic principles necessarily, that people get triggered still by fear-based messaging around race, or people that are gay, that they're being told in church every week are sinning, and immigration, and there's a lot of these fear-based triggers that take long-term conversation where you're actually engaging with people and being vulnerable with them about these things. And I just think the role of long-term support for people who are organizing and constantly, you know, being able to evaluate and learn more about how to have these conversations is critical. So I'm really concerned, like, that we're training bunches of people who we want to, but what, you know, what are some of the ideas about pulling people together long term so that they may win on issues, but also they're thinking about civil rights broadly and democratic principles.
Yeah, I'm so glad you said this. I had your face on the screen. I can't find it now, but
It's okay.
yeah, I like kind of part of what you described is what the kind of organizing I was trained in, of which I think like a huge part was right, which was these starting where people are at, widely, deeply felt issues, cutting, getting people the experience of winning, developing leaders, and like a collective self, like that all still feels right to me. What we were also taught, whether it wasn't super explicit, was like, well, let's don't deal with race. Well, let's just deal on the things we can all agree with. Or let's don't deal with immigration, or let's don't deal with this thing. And that is the part that I don't think makes sense or has served us well. If there's not a plan to eventually dig into the areas where there is uncommon ground, so to speak, that the right will be able to kind of, you know, basically animate and stir people up around those issues, and we've done nothing to help people rethink them. I have found deep canvassing and even the principles of deep canvassing as a way that helps us, you know, including me, like re-examine. I think things way different than I thought growing up in Indiana, but it's because some people were like suspended judgment with me, didn't shout me down because I didn't see things the way they do, and basically created a path for waking for me. So I think we have to build organizations that are doing the fundamentals of organizing, but I think, as you say, figure out how we're going to engage in like helping people see some of the ways that hate and division is being stirred up in all of us. And that's not I mean, if people want to act like that's a rural thing, that's a thing happening all across the country and all across the world right now. So I think we're trying to figure out how to build that kind of organizing. And the last thing I'd say is, like, I believe a lot of that, if you could call it political education, but doesn't happen through political education, it happens through the work of the fight and the trying to win. And then when we hit brick walls, we start to see it's like, oh, us buying into this idea is actually part of the reason we're not winning. So I think you're 100% right. And I think it's like one of the primary challenges that all of us have to figure out, and organizing in particular.
Kat Ginzel. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. Let's see. Kat, are you still there? Did you want to ask your question? Okay, I will come back. Oh, there you are.
Question as a comment. I've been the precinct committee organizer in my community for a few years, and I look at it as being the bottom line is getting people out to vote. I mean, that's really where I'm going with everything. Beyond just introducing people to issues or answering questions and passing on information. And what I found, what works is training the precinct committee people to go into their neighborhoods and introduce themselves as their neighbor, because what does not work is when we have people coming from outside the community, especially from the neighboring cities, thinking that they know how to talk to these people, but I've watched people's eyes glaze over, you know, at the door when they realize that they're not, you know, they don't live here. But I go in and say, you know, I live down the street, so I know what the issues are around here, and people then want to have conversation. And another thing is, people often will from the cities, they talk about, you know, connecting to the numbers, getting lots and lots of calls, lots and lots of doors. And what I find is, when somebody wants to talk in a rural community, let them have just about all the time that they want to talk.
Yeah. Did you get cut off, or I couldn't tell if you were done there.
It might be done. Yeah, that echoes a lot of what you were saying, George.
Yeah, I feel like, yeah, I just 100% agree. And I think it's, and I mean, I've been driving around the country and in a different hat of mine, supporting some rural Democratic county chairs that are just exceptional people doing work, and a lot of stories about how the state, or the national party want them to do things that actually just don't really line up with the way things work, is what I hear you saying. So I'm 100%, or even this thing of only knock on these doors, and a lot of the folks I talk to that win knock on all the doors. And so I can only agree with you.
Thanks, Kat. Anthony, go ahead.
Thanks, Erica. Hey, George. What I was wondering, and it kind of relates, as I understood it, to a question in the chat as well that Elizabeth had. She asked about emphasizing the importance of the people who actually live there. Now, my understanding of your new gig is that part of it is you emphasize training working class people to be organizers if they don't already have the skills. Can you talk a little more about that? Because it seems like within the world of progressives trying to make a better world, there's a similar sort of divide as we have in the larger world, where highly educated people from kind of a bubble of a certain way of thinking become the campaign managers and the campaign staff and the professional organizing class. And most of them are not from working class backgrounds, in my experience. So I'm really curious, and maybe this gets at Elizabeth's question too, about organizing people to do organizing or training people to do organizing in their own communities, training working class people to organize in working class places.
Yeah, that's exactly, totally agree. And then that's what this new organization is about, is helping, like, basically right now, I think you have a lot of nonprofit organizations, that are in the progressive sphere, let's say, for lack of a better term, that are either led by people that their working class roots or their local roots are so far gone they are a distant memory, or we just have a world of nonprofit professionals, these are mostly great people, but so what we've been trying to do is help figure out how to identify working class peoples in communities and get them what they need. Just like somebody got me what I needed at a soup kitchen in Southern Indiana, and otherwise, and nobody's gonna know. I wouldn't have known how to get training, certainly not how to get a grant or any of that, or how to navigate this growing, sector that we're all part of. And so that's the thing. So just like in New Mexico is one example, the people that we found are like, they're bottom lining and running, and they're off and they're in charge of organizing projects in their communities. And we didn't say, oh, you need to hire a nonprofit professional to lead it. You should lead it. It's your neighborhood. You should lead it. And that's what, so we're just doing that all. And instead of saying, well, now you need to start a 501c3, and now you need to do this thing, and now you need to do that thing. So I think we're saying the same thing and hoping to try to, and we think then that's going to lead to a whole different set of leadership who's going to say, hey, at the end of the day, in Jackson County, Indiana, or in public housing in Cincinnati, or whatever it is, this is how things work, and you need to know that and bring that into the conversation. So I do, Anthony, I think of it as a long-term battle. To be honest, it's not going to, we're not going to pull that off overnight, because we're kind of organized in the exact opposite way right now.
So there's some sort of chatter in the chat about, like, is what's being suggested here that progressives in the cities should or should not be playing a role in rural organizing, and if there is a role for them, what is it? And some people feel like what they're asked to do by whatever urban-based groups they're associated with turns out to be counterproductive. And at the same time, like, I can say from my own experience, when I lived in Berkeley, I was trained with Working America AFL-CIO to go out and deep canvas in Modesto, which is in the California Central Valley. And I hope I wasn't doing more harm than good, but a lot of us from the Bay Area went out there, but we were trained in how to do it. And I think we did a decent job. I don't think it was necessarily like a backfire just because a lot of us were coming in from the city. But what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, main thing, I think we need to break up a kind of power and resource pipeline that doesn't make it to rural communities, small towns, a lot of small cities, a lot of places in the country. And right now the resources get stuck somewhere else and they don't get there. So if they don't get to your community, then you kind of have to negotiate deals with other groups and try to make them as least onerous as possible or fit your community as best possible. And I think, what a lot of us have been trying to do, especially in the last, a growing number in the last 7 years, is to figure out how to break down that, or at least create a pipeline to where people are actually able to have power in some of these strategies and decisions instead of going, we don't like this one that was pushed on us, we like this one. But I think that because the disinvestment, and I'm not mainly here to talk about rural, I'm here to talk about community organizing, just to be clear. But I think that is a thing. I think that is a long-term issue to address because it's been going on for so long. I don't know if that helps, Erica.
Well, people can feel free to keep discussing it in the chat or raise your
I'm
hand.
not going to even try to keep up with the
one.
chat.
It is a tough one. Okay, Martha, how about you?
Hi. Yeah, hi. I'm in Georgia.
Hi, Martha. I know you.
How are you?
Good to see you.
So one of the things that we think about, I am in Metro Atlanta, but I'm from South Georgia, so I know the territory. But we have a number of small grassroots groups and people who have been doing this organizing work for many years without any kind of resources, as you were saying. And so we've actually raised money to do things like send gift cards so that they can buy gas. A lot of the people who are doing this work, are doing it on a very small fixed income. And so just by building those relationships and helping to funnel some of the resources that we have in the city further out and make those friends just has made all the difference. I don't live there. I can't go out there and talk to people the way folks can in those communities, right? So it's just anything that you can do that helps to get those resources out and ask them what they need. Find out what people need. Local organizers can tell you exactly what they need.
Exactly. They just don't get asked that often, right?
No, they don't.
Yeah. And I would say that about suburban, urban, rural. I think that's right. And then what I like about your story is you from Southern Georgia moved to, a major city and then decided to, didn't forget where you came from in this story. Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's see. Bruce?
Oh, thanks. The last person who spoke brought up what I think should be the favorite word of all of us, and it's relationships. And I mean that with building your own team, finding people you can work with, and frankly, trying to influence other people. And I say this with some reluctance because I'm not a very patient person. And, I'm not the ideal person to be building relationships, I have to tell you. But I really think that's so key to all of this, and maybe just so obvious I should be embarrassed by even mentioning it.
The focus on relationships?
Right.
No, definitely. I think I'm glad you said it. I don't think you can do, certainly the kind of organizing I'm talking about is impossible without kind of an investment in relationships. And if we just plow through the cutting an issue and the power analysis in our building and connecting with each other, I think it is the most essential part of organizing. In my book, I don't know how to do it without it. And if we take that out of it, it becomes some pretty technical stuff. So I'm in 100% agreement. And same with re-examining how you believe on something. It's like, I might be willing to re-examine how I believe on something if somebody's suspends judgment, that, has invested in me. We've got a relationship and we want to talk. So like, and then I'll just say in our training, there's a whole piece around, we started with this one training that I kind of walk you through some of the top lines on, because we did a bunch of interviews and this is what organizers told us they needed. So we didn't just dream it up. It was like showed up as the number one need. But also in the training we have been doing hearing a lot from people who want training on relationship building, but also how do you help people become leaders, move from being, here, let me pull up another slide. It's come up a lot. Not that great at this screen share thing, so, but let's see if I can do it. View slideshow. Kind of this, some from this like universe is, this large group, everybody lives in the community to like a list. We all build lists in our work. Somebody becomes a member, they join, but how somebody actually become a leader in the community. And one of the, and a lot of, I never thought when I was eating at a soup kitchen in Southern Indiana and, about ready to go to jail, I didn't think I was going to become a leader, but somebody thought I could become one and they helped me figure out how to get up. But so how do you build these lists and members and leadership development? And we found in our training, people just want more and more of the leadership development. And then the other one they want to know is more about the relationship building. So I'm glad you brought that up.
And George, and this might be a good note to end on. Someone was asking for another success story. I guess that could be from People's Action campaign or some other campaign that you've worked on. They would like a concrete example.
I'm trying to think about how big to go on something. So, I'm going to give a really local example, and because it kind of hits on some of these points. So, I really got trained, I will say we won that housing trust fund I told you about. We went from fumbling and not knowing how to organize at the soup kitchen to finally figuring out how to cut an issue, to finally figuring out how to turn it into a man, and finally winning a housing trust fund in Southern Indiana. But I'm going to give a really hyper local issue. So I came to Chicago to get trained by some of the legends in community organizing and went out and knocked on a bunch of doors in the community. I'm looking for a widely and deeply felt issue, and I'm listening. And two issues came up a lot in those door knocks. And one was a huge abandoned factory that was completely dilapidated, bricks falling out into the sidewalk, completely open for kids to go into, and had been like that for years. And that was the issue that came up the most in the door knocking. The other issue was rats. Like there was a major kind of rat infestation in the neighborhood, and the city hadn't replaced the trash cans forever. So the rats in Chicago will chew through the trash cans. And so they hadn't replaced them forever. So there's just this major rat. So that came up too. There were some other issues, but those are the two main issues that came up. So we had a meeting and to talk about the abandoned factory, because it was a bigger issue. Lots of people felt widely and deeply about it. And at that meeting, it became clear that this very new green group that had come together probably wasn't ready to go up against the mayor of Chicago, Mayor Daley at the time, the head of the Department of Buildings, and the building owner, who, as far as we could tell, was very absentee, lived in Florida, and was not somebody we were going to easily be able to put pressure on. So in the middle of the meeting, we were like, you know what, maybe we should start with rats. And so we organized, and this is talk about cutting an issue. We've gone from a big abandoned factory to just organizing around rats. We organized a public meeting with the Deputy Commissioner of Rodent Control, which at that point I didn't know was such a position in the world. Had them out to a community meeting at a church, put pressure on them. They did trash cans, they abated for rats and all of that. And out of that, the group felt confident. They'd gained skills. They'd gone public as leaders. And then we took on the factory. We got it boarded up first. That was the first win. We got it knocked down. I mean, this extends almost an entire city block, and then we got it turned into affordable housing. But it all started by listening for issues, by not somebody coming in as an expert telling people what they should work on. It started with like finding something, cutting the issue, finding something people could win and get an experience on, and then from there graduating to a bigger issue and a bigger issue and a bigger issue. And that group of people went on to work on citywide issues in the city of Chicago, to work on national campaigns. But there was something by starting with listening, starting on something manageable, giving people the success the experience of success that led to those bigger fights. So a very local one, but definitely one that kind of illustrates a lot of what we talked about earlier in this.
Great. Just one last logistical thing, and then we're going to wrap up, and I'll announce our next month's briefing topic. George, is there a link you can drop into the chat if people want to get on the list to sign up for the next round of trainings?
Yep. We're going to see my skills here. Let's see. This I'm going to share should have the both that and this little book I mentioned that's going to come out on the, like, either one. If you go to this and subscribe, you got to subscribe, but you'll get the thing. You'll get, we're going to announce some stuff soon. That I didn't put the whole URL on here. I should have been ready for this, Erica. I'm sorry.
That's okay. While you're doing that, Anthony, do you want to tell us what is on deck for next month?
Sure, happy to. Thanks, Erica. George, this was great. Very, very grateful for you taking the time. Next month in October, it'll be the first Wednesday in October at 4:00. We're going to be discussing a rural New Deal, which is something that Ruby has been working on along with an organization called Progressive Democrats of America. It's kind of a new thing for us and something that we're quite excited to be part of. And we'll be discussing both what is in it and also what we hope comes of it.
Great. Thanks, Anthony. So hope to see you all next month. I want to really thank George for a great presentation, so practical and useful and inspiring with all the examples of successes. And thanks everyone for a really robust chat and participation. I think this has been a great session. And so with that, we'll bring it to a close and hope to see you all next month. Bye now.